the inbred Habsburg niece forced to marry her own uncle. The Hofburg Palace in Vienna was not a single building, but a great calcification of ambition, a labyrinth of courtyards and corridors that had been added to by every Habsburg archduke who had ever drawn breath. By the autumn of the year 1668, it had become a place of deep shadows and shallower air. The windows were tall and clear, but they seemed to let in only a certain kind of light, a thin, yellowish light that fell upon tapestries depicting hunts and crucifixions, upon floors of dark oak, polished to a treacherous shine by generations of servants who walked in silence. In a suite of rooms on the second floor of the Amalienburg, a girl sat by a window. Her name was Maria Antonia, and she was the only daughter of the Habsburg line that still held the title of Holy Roman Emperor. She was 12 years old, though she looked younger. Her body was slight, a thing of narrow shoulders and fragile wrists, and her face bore the map of her lineage with an uncomfortable clarity. The famous Habsburg lip was present, not the grotesque deformity of some of her ancestors, but a pronounced overhang of the upper jaw that made it difficult for her to close her mouth completely. Her lower lip jutted forward in a pout that was not a pout, but a skeletal reality. Her eyes, however, were magnificent. They were a deep, liquid brown, intelligent and watchful, the eyes of a creature that had learned early that the world was full of larger teeth. She was not supposed to be in this room. The Hofburg had strict geographies. The men, the emperor, the councillors, the Spanish ambassadors with their stiff white ruffs, occupied the southern and western wings. The women were confined to the north and east, to the Kaiserinnenzimmer, the empress's apartments, where the air smelled of pomander balls and rosewater, and the subtle, ever-present rot of too many bodies packed into too small a space. But Maria Antonia had discovered a forgotten stairwell behind a tapestry of Diana the Huntress, and this forgotten stairwell led to a small, dusty anteroom that looked out over the Augustinian church. She came here every afternoon when her Spanish etiquette lessons were finished, when her mother, the Empress, had retired to her sessile with a headache, when the court settled into the long, buzzing silence of the siesta. From this window, she could see the rooftops of Vienna. The city was a mess of red tile and soot, crossed by the blue-green ribbon of the Danube. She could see common women hanging laundry in courtyards, children running with hoops and sticks. She could see dogs barking at cats. It was a world of motion, of accident, of life. It was not her world. Her world was a room with a crucifix on every wall, where the priests came and went with the regularity of a pulse. Her world was the constant correction of her posture, the endless washing of her hands, the taste of boiled mutton, and the faint metallic aftertaste of the mercury compounds her doctors gave her for the mysterious rashes that bloomed on her arms. Her world was the knowledge, deep, unspoken, carried in the bone, that she was valuable only insofar as she could produce a male child who looked sufficiently like a Habsburg to rule. She heard the footsteps before the door opened. They were soft, deferential, but they belonged to someone who knew exactly where she was. The door swung inward, and her Spanish lady-in-waiting, Doña Inés de Zuniga, appeared. Doña Inés was a widow of 50, a woman constructed entirely of black silk, whalebone, and unshakable loyalty to the House of Austria. Her face was a wrinkled map of the Pyrenees, and her hands were never still. They were always folding, unfolding, smoothing, patting. "Querida Nina," Doña Inés said, and her voice a dry rustle, "you should not be here. The dust, it is not good for your humors." "The dust is the only honest thing in this palace," Maria Antonia replied, not turning from the window. She spoke Spanish, the language of the court, though her German was passable and her French excellent. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. Doña Inés clicked her tongue. Philosophy before your 13th birthday. Your father, the Emperor, will hear of this. My father, the Emperor, has not spoken to me directly in 3 months. Maria Antonia finally turned. Her face was calm, but there was a tremor in her lower lip, the lip that would not close. He sends his greetings through Count Lamberg. He sends his blessings through the court chaplain. He does not send himself. Doña Inés hesitated. The truth was a dangerous commodity in the Hofburg. To speak, it was to risk the displeasure of a god who had made the Habsburgs his chosen instruments. But Doña Inés had known this girl since the hour of her birth, had washed the meconium from her infant skin, had watched the physicians prod and poke at her tiny body, searching for the signs of the family curse. She loved her, as much as a woman of her station was permitted to love a child of the blood imperial. He is busy, Doña Inés said finally. The Empire, the Turks, the French. There is always— He is afraid, Maria Antonia interrupted. He is afraid to look at me because I remind him of what he is. I have his chin. I have his brother's eyes. I have the dead look of our grandmother Maria Anna, who died before I was born, but whose portrait hangs in the gallery with the lip already in place. He sees me, and he sees the rot. Doña Inés crossed the room swiftly and took the girl by the shoulders. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You will never say that again, she hissed. You will never think it. You are an Archduchess of Austria. Your blood is the blood of emperors. Your body is a sacred vessel. The rot, as you call it, is a sign, a mark of election. The Habsburg lip is not a deformity. It is a crown worn on the inside of the mouth. Maria Antonia stared at her. The older woman's eyes were wet. You believe that, the girl said. Not a question, a statement. I have to, Doña Inés whispered. We all have to. Otherwise, we would throw ourselves from these windows into the Danube. For a long moment, they stood there in the dusty light. Then Maria Antonia sighed, a surprisingly adult sound, and smoothed her skirts. What is it, Inés? Why did you come looking for me? Doña Inés released her shoulders and stepped back. Her face closed down, became the mask of the courtier. Your mother, the Empress, requests your presence in her private chamber. There is a visitor, someone you must meet. A visitor? Maria Antonia's brow furrowed. Visitors were rare. The Habsburgs did not entertain. They negotiated, they married, they buried. The only visitors to her mother's private chamber were ambassadors with marriage proposals, and those proposals always came with a portrait attached, a painted lie on a wooden panel, showing a boy with clear skin and strong teeth, a boy who would be dead of consumption within 5 years of the wedding night. Who is it? She asked. Doña Inés took a breath. His Imperial Majesty's brother, the Archduke Karl Joseph of Austria, your uncle. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into deep water. Karl Joseph. She knew the name, of course. Every Habsburg child knew the role of the family, the litany of names that repeated themselves like a prayer cycle. Ferdinand, Karl, Leopold, Maria. Karl Joseph was the youngest son of the late Emperor Ferdinand III, the brother of her father, Leopold I. He was Bishop of Passau and Breslau, though he had never taken holy orders in any serious way. He was 20 years old. He was the spare, the second son, the one who had been destined for the church, so that he would not challenge his brother's claim to the throne. And he was, by the standards of the family, notoriously ill. Maria Antonia had heard the whispers. She had heard the ladies-in-waiting muttering behind their fans, the way they fell silent when she approached. Fits, they said, convulsions, a falling sickness. He cannot be left alone with candles, for fear he will seize and set the curtains ablaze. He speaks in tongues, they say, when the humor rises to his brain. He bit a serving girl once, drew blood. They had to put an iron bit between his teeth, like a horse. Her uncle, the bishop with the falling sickness. "Why does he wish to see me?" Maria Antonia asked, and her voice was very small. Doña Inés took her hand. The older woman's palm was dry and warm. "Come, Nina, your mother will explain." The Empress's chamber. The room smelled of lavender and camphor. Empress Margarita Teresa of Austria was only 17 years old, but she looked 40. She had been born in Madrid, the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, and his second wife, Mariana of Austria. She was, therefore, a double Habsburg. Her father and mother were uncle and niece. The result of that union was a woman of exquisite fragility. Her skin was the color of old ivory, translucent at the temples, where the blue veins pulsed visibly. Her body was small and curved, like a child's doll carved from wax, and she suffered from chronic fevers that came and went with the phases of the moon. She was also Maria Antonia's mother, and she was also her first cousin. The lines of descent had become so tangled in the Habsburg family that no one could trace them without a chart and a great deal of patience. Emperor Leopold had married his own niece, the daughter of his mother's brother. This was not scandalous. This was expected. This was how the blood remained pure, how the inheritance remained undivided, how the family fortune, the thrones of Spain, Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and a dozen lesser principalities, stayed in the hands of those who bore the chin. Maria Antonia entered the chamber with her head bowed, her hands folded over her stomach. She had been trained in the Spanish court ceremony, the most rigid in Europe, and she moved like a mechanical doll. Small steps, no swaying of the hips, eyes cast down at a 45-degree angle. Doña Inés followed a pace behind, her keys jingling at her waist. The Empress was seated in a high-backed chair near the fire, though the room was not cold. She was wrapped in a banyan of blue silk, and her dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, a sign of informality that made Maria Antonia's heart beat faster. Her mother only wore her hair down when she was very ill or very distressed. "Come closer, my treasure," the Empress said. Her voice was soft, with the lisp of the Spanish Habsburgs, the tongue that could not quite find the teeth. "Come and kiss my hand." Maria Antonia approached, knelt, and pressed her lips to her mother's ring, a massive emerald set in gold, the stone that had belonged to Empress Isabella, the one who had sold her jewels to fund the voyage of Columbus. The irony of that history was lost on no one in the room. The Habsburgs had been funding voyages and wars and weddings for 200 years, and they had nothing to show for it but more territory, more debt, and more of the family face. "Rise, child. Stand here, where I can see you." The Empress gestured to a spot near her knee. Maria Antonia rose and stood, her hands still folded, her eyes still downcast. She could feel the weight of another gaze in the room. She looked up just briefly and saw him. Archduke Karl Joseph sat in a smaller chair near the window, half in shadow. He was 20 years old, but he looked older. His face was long and narrow, dominated by the same mandibular protrusion that marked his brother and his niece. The Habsburg lip was more pronounced in him than in Maria Antonia. His lower jaw jutted forward, so that his teeth were visible even when his mouth was closed. A row of yellowed, uneven teeth that seemed to be trying to escape his face. His eyes were pale blue, watery, and they blinked too often. His hands, resting on the arms of his chair, were large and knobby, the hands of a much taller man attached to a body of average height. He wore the black cassock of a bishop, but he had not bothered to button it properly. A stain, wine, perhaps, or something darker, marked the front of his collar. He was looking at Maria Antonia with an intensity that made her skin crawl. It was not the look of an uncle regarding his niece. It was the look of a man appraising a horse, noting the slope of its shoulders, the width of its chest, the probable soundness of its wind. "You are small," he said. His voice was surprising, deep, almost melodious, completely at odds with his ruined face. "Smaller than I expected. Your mother was small at your age, and she grew. You will grow." Maria Antonia did not know what to say. She looked at her mother. The Empress's face was unreadable. "Karl Joseph," the Empress said, "you are frightening her. Speak of pleasant things. Ask her about her embroidery." "I do not care about her embroidery," Karl Joseph said. He leaned forward. The chair creaked. "I care about her blood. I care about her womb. I care about whether she can carry a child to term without dying of childbed fever, as so many of our women have done." He smiled, revealing the full horror of his teeth. "These are the only things that matter, sister-in-law. You know this. You almost died bringing this one into the world. You have lost 3 since. 2 boys, a girl. All of them buried in the crypt at the Augustiner Kirche. All of them with the jaw already forming on their little skulls." The Empress's face went white. "That is enough." "It is not enough," Karl Joseph said. He rose from his chair. He was unsteady on his feet, and he put a hand on the windowsill to steady himself. "It will never be enough. Not until we have secured the line. Not until we have a male heir who can rule Spain and Austria both, who can unite the 2 thrones under one crown, who can push back the French and the Ottomans and the Protestants and everyone else who wants to tear apart what our ancestors built." He took a step toward Maria Antonia. She did not step back. She had been trained not to step back, but every nerve in her body was screaming. "You know why I am here," he said, looking down at her. "You are not stupid. The court says you are clever, too clever for a girl. They say you read Latin and Greek. They say you have argued with the court chaplain about the nature of the Eucharist. They say you asked your father why God permitted the Turks to besiege Vienna, and he had no answer." He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Cleverness will not save you, niece. Cleverness will not close your mouth or flatten your jaw, or give you the wide hips of a peasant woman who can birth 10 children without a complaint. But cleverness might help you understand what is about to happen." Maria Antonia found her voice. It came out steady, which surprised her. "What is about to happen, uncle?" Karl Joseph looked at the Empress. The Empress looked at the floor. The silence stretched, filled with the sound of the fire crackling and the distant rumble of a cart on the cobblestones below. "Your father, the Emperor, and I have reached an agreement," Karl Joseph said. "I will renounce my bishoprics. I will renounce my claim to any ecclesiastical office. I will return to the world as a layman, as a prince of the blood, and I will marry." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Marry whom?" Maria Antonia asked, though she already knew. She had known since the moment Doña Inés had come to fetch her from the dusty anteroom. The knowledge was a cold stone in her stomach. "You," Karl Joseph said, "you will marry me, your uncle, your father's brother. We will be bound in the sight of God and the Church by dispensation of His Holiness the Pope, who has already been persuaded to look favorably upon the union. We will produce children. Those children will be more Habsburg than any Habsburgs who have come before. They will carry the blood of both the Austrian and the Spanish lines in their veins. They will be the heirs to everything." Maria Antonia turned to her mother. The Empress was crying, silently, tears sliding down her ivory cheeks and dripping onto the blue silk of her banyan. She did not wipe them away. She did not speak. She simply sat there, a captive queen in a gilded cage, watching her daughter be devoured by the family that had devoured her first. "And if I refuse?" Maria Antonia asked. She was not being defiant. She was genuinely curious. The question of refusal had never arisen in her education. She had been taught to obey, to submit, to fold her will into the will of her father and her God. The possibility of a no was a philosophical abstraction, like the question of whether angels could sin. Karl Joseph's watery eyes narrowed. "You cannot refuse. You are 12 years old. You are a girl. You have no legal existence apart from your father. If he commands you to marry me, you will marry me. If you protest, you will be locked in a convent until you are 25, by which time your womb will be cold and your value will be nothing. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life in a stone cell, praying for the soul of a family that has forgotten you?" Maria Antonia considered this. A convent, silence, the rhythm of the hours, the taste of bread and water. No Karl Joseph, no children, no court, no balls of mercury for her rashes, no priests correcting her posture, no mother crying silently into her banyan, but also no window overlooking the rooftops of Vienna, no children running with hoops and sticks, no dogs barking at cats, no life. She looked at her mother. The Empress had stopped crying. She was watching her daughter with an expression that Maria Antonia could not quite read. It was not hope. It was not despair. It was something else, something like recognition. "I will obey my father," Maria Antonia said. The words came out flat, mechanical, as if spoken by someone else. "I will marry my uncle." Karl Joseph smiled again, and his teeth caught the firelight. "Good girl," he said. "Good, clever girl. You have made the right choice. The only choice. The Habsburg choice." He reached out and touched her face. His fingers were cold and dry, and they traced the line of her jaw. The jaw that matched his own, the jaw that marked them both as members of the most powerful family in Europe. He lingered for a moment on the jut of her lower lip, the place where her mouth would not close. "We will make beautiful children," he said. "They will be strong. They will be pure. They will be Habsburgs." And then he turned and walked out of the room, his cassock brushing the floor, his footsteps uneven on the polished wood. The Empress held out her arms. Maria Antonia went to her, and for a long time mother and daughter held each other in the lavender-scented darkness, saying nothing at all. The dispensation Rome was far away, but its voice was everywhere. Pope Clement IX was an old man with a kind face and a talent for compromise, and the Habsburgs had been asking him for favors for decades. The favor they asked now was not unprecedented, but it was unusual. A marriage between an uncle and his niece was forbidden by canon law, by natural law, by the laws of every civilized nation in Christendom. But the Church had a mechanism for exceptions. It was called a dispensation, and it was available to those who could pay. The negotiations took 6 months. The Habsburg ambassador in Rome, a cardinal named Giovanni Battista Rospigliosi, who happened to be the Pope's nephew, because even the Pope could not escape the logic of nepotism, argued the case with eloquence and a great deal of gold. The case was simple. The House of Austria needed to preserve its patrimony. The Spanish line of the Habsburgs was dying. King Charles II of Spain, Maria Antonia's maternal uncle, was a sickly, feeble-minded creature who could barely walk and was not expected to produce an heir. If he died without children, the Spanish throne would pass to the French Bourbons, who would encircle and destroy Austria. The only way to prevent this catastrophe was to unite the Austrian and Spanish claims in the person of a single child. A child who would be born of 2 Habsburgs, the most Habsburg of Habsburgs, a child whose blood would be so pure that no one could dispute his right to rule. The Pope was not stupid. He knew what this meant. He knew that the Habsburgs had been marrying each other for generations, and he had seen the results, the stillbirths, the deformities, the children who died before they could speak. He had read the medical reports that the Habsburgs themselves had commissioned, the secret documents that catalogued the physical decay of the family in painstaking detail. He knew that the chin was just the beginning. He knew about the hydrocephalus, the epilepsy, the hemophilia, the mysterious fevers that burned through the bloodline like fire through dry grass. But he also knew that the Habsburgs were the most powerful family in Europe, and that if he refused them, they would find another pope who would say yes. Clement IX was old, and he was tired, and he wanted to die in peace. He signed the dispensation on a rainy Tuesday in March, with a gold pen that had been a gift from the emperor, and he died 3 months later. His last words, reportedly, a muttered complaint about the cost of ink. The news reached Vienna on a bright spring morning. Maria Antonia was 14 years old now. She had grown taller, as Karl Joseph had predicted, but her body had not filled out in the way the court physicians had hoped. Her hips were narrow, her breasts were small, and her rashes had spread to her legs and back. The doctors had increased her dose of mercury, and her gums had begun to bleed. She spat blood into a handkerchief every morning, a routine she had learned to perform without comment. She was standing in the same dusty anteroom looking out at the same rooftops when Doña Inés came to find her. The old woman's face was pale, her hands trembling. "The dispensation has arrived," Doña Inés said. "His Holiness the Pope has granted it. The wedding will take place in 6 weeks." Maria Antonia did not turn around. "And Karl Joseph? Has he renounced his bishoprics?" "He has. He is no longer a bishop. He is now simply the Archduke Karl Joseph of Austria, legitimate son of the late Emperor Ferdinand III, brother of the reigning Emperor Leopold I, and your betrothed." "My uncle," Maria Antonia said. "Your husband," Doña Inés corrected, her voice barely a whisper. There was a long silence. A bird, a sparrow perhaps, landed on the windowsill and tilted its head at Maria Antonia, as if puzzled by her stillness. Then it flew away. "Inés," Maria Antonia said, "do you think God sees what we do? Do you think he watches from heaven, noting every marriage, every birth, every death? Do you think he keeps a ledger?" Doña Inés crossed herself. "Of course, Nina, God sees everything. He sees the sparrow fall. He sees the hairs on our heads. Then he sees this. Maria Antonia said, turning at last. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard. He sees my uncle coming to my bed. He sees my father giving me away like a coin. He sees the Pope writing his name on a piece of paper that makes all of it holy. And he does nothing. He watches. He keeps his ledger. And he does nothing. Doña Inés opened her mouth to speak, to offer some comfort, some pious evasion. But no words came. She had served the Habsburgs for 30 years. She had seen too much. She knew that the girl was right. "What would you have me do, Nina?" she asked finally. "I am an old woman. I have no power. I can only follow." Maria Antonia walked to her and took her hands. The old woman's hands were rough, worn by decades of service. The girl's hands were soft, pale, marked by the same fine tremor that afflicted her mother. "You can stay with me," Maria Antonia said. "You can hold my hand when I am afraid. You can tell me that the dust is the only honest thing in the palace. You can do that, Inés. It will be enough." Doña Inés nodded, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I will stay," she said. "I will stay until they carry me out." The wedding. The Augustinian church was packed. Every noble in Vienna had come to see the spectacle. The 14-year-old archduchess marrying her 22-year-old uncle. The bishop, who had renounced his vows for the sake of the dynasty. The air was thick with incense and sweat, and the light through the stained glass windows fell in colored patches on the stone floor. Red, blue, gold, the colors of the Habsburg coat of arms. Maria Antonia wore a gown of white silk, embroidered with silver thread. The train was so long that it took 4 pages to carry it. Her hair was piled high on her head, crowned with a circlet of diamonds and emeralds. She had been painted by the court artist the week before, and the portrait showed a serene, beautiful girl, with the famous lip rendered as a charming pout. The reality was different. The mercury had done its work. Her gums were inflamed, her cheeks were hollow, and her eyes had the flat, staring quality of a hunted animal. Karl Joseph stood at the altar in a coat of black velvet, his face flushed with excitement and something else, something that looked like fear. He had been having more seizures lately. The physician said it was the stress of the renunciation, the loss of his ecclesiastical identity, the pressure of impending fatherhood. He had bitten through his tongue twice in the past month, and he spoke with a slight lisp now, the result of a healing wound. The ceremony was conducted by the Archbishop of Vienna, a fat, genial man who had performed so many Habsburg weddings that he had a special cushion made for his knees. He read the dispensation aloud, in Latin, so that only a handful of people in the church could understand it, and then he asked the questions. "Maria Antonia, filia imperatoris, vis accipere Carolum Josephum patruum tuum, in tuum legitimum maritum?" "Volo," she said. "I wish it." The traditional response, the lie that made everything legal. "Carol Joseph, fili imperatoris, vis accipere Mariam Antoniam, neptum tuam, in tuam legitimam uxorem." "Volo," Karl Joseph said. His voice cracked on the first syllable, a boy's voice breaking in a man's throat. They exchanged rings. Karl Joseph's hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped the ring. A plain gold band, heavy, old. The same ring that had been used for every Habsburg wedding since the time of Maximilian I. He slid it onto her finger, and she felt the cold metal settle against her skin like a manacle. The Archbishop blessed them. The choir sang. The congregation wept, some from joy, some from grief, most from the sheer overwhelming theater of it all. The Habsburgs knew how to put on a show. They had been doing it for centuries. After the ceremony, there was a banquet in the Hofburg's Rittersaal, the Knight's Hall. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted swans, boars' heads, sugared almonds, and mountains of marchpane. The wine flowed in fountains. The musicians played until their fingers bled, and everyone pretended not to notice that the bride had not eaten a single bite, that the groom had excused himself 3 times to vomit in a silver basin, that the emperor sat at the head of the table with a smile frozen on his face, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Maria Antonia sat beside her new husband, her uncle, and she let the celebration wash over her. She thought of the sparrow on the windowsill. She thought of the children running with hoops and sticks. She thought of the dust in the anteroom, the honest dust that did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. I am 14 years old, she thought. I am married to my uncle. Tonight he will come to my bed, and tomorrow I will begin the work of making children who will carry the chin and the epilepsy and the bleeding gums into the next generation. This is my life. This is my duty. This is my destiny. She raised her goblet of wine, watered, for she was still a child, and the doctors feared the effect of alcohol on her humors, and she drank. The wedding night. The bridal chamber was in the same suite of rooms where Maria Antonia had grown up. The irony was not lost on her. She had slept in this bed as a little girl, clutching a stuffed dog made of linen, dreaming of princes who rode white horses and spoke in rhymes. Now she was the wife of a man with a falling sickness and a mouth full of yellow teeth, and the stuffed dog had been put away in a trunk, never to be seen again. She was undressed by Doña Inés and a team of maids. They removed the heavy gown, the silver embroidery, the circlet of diamonds. They unlaced her stays, and she breathed deeply for the first time in 12 hours. They washed her face and hands with rose water, brushed out her hair until it fell in dark waves around her shoulders, and put her in a nightgown of white linen, plain and simple, the kind of garment a peasant girl might wear. Doña Inés dismissed the maids with a flick of her hand. When they were alone, she took Maria Antonia's face in her hands and looked into her eyes. "Listen to me, Nina," she said. "It will hurt. I will not lie to you. It will hurt, and you will want to cry, and you will want to scream. But you must not. You must lie still. You must let him do what he needs to do. And when it is over, you must wash yourself with the vinegar and water that I have left on the table. Do you understand?" Maria Antonia nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. "He is not a monster," Doña Inés continued, though her voice wavered. "He is a man, a sick man, a frightened man, a man who has been told his whole life that his only value is in the children he can produce. He is as trapped as you are. Remember that. It may help." "Will it?" Maria Antonia whispered. Doña Inés had no answer. She kissed the girl's forehead, a dry, motherly kiss, and then she left. The door closed. The fire crackled, and Maria Antonia sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. She did not have to wait long. The door opened again, and Karl Joseph entered. He had changed out of his black velvet coat, and was wearing a dressing gown of red silk, the kind of garment that was meant to look luxurious, but on him looked merely pathetic. His hair was disheveled, his face was pale, and his hands were still shaking. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, as if the effort of walking across the room had exhausted him. He looked at her white nightgown, her bare feet, her dark hair, and something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or recognition, or simply the animal awareness of a male in the presence of a female. "You are very young," he said. "You are very old," she replied. He was 22. It was a ridiculous thing to say, but she said it anyway, because she had to say something. He laughed, a short, barking sound. "I am old. I feel old. I have been dying since the day I was born, niece. We all have. The only question is how long it takes." He pushed himself off the door and walked toward her. His gait was unsteady, but he did not stumble. He stopped a few feet away from her and stood there, swaying slightly. "I did not want this," he said. "You must believe me. I did not want to be a bishop. I did not want to renounce my bishoprics. I did not want to marry a child. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to read my books and drink my wine and die in peace without anyone expecting anything of me. But we do not get what we want. We get what the family needs." "The family," Maria Antonia repeated. The word tasted like ash. "The family," he said, "the spider in the center of the web. We are its legs, niece. We move when it tells us to move. We bite when it tells us to bite. And if we try to cut ourselves free, we bleed to death." He took another step toward her. Now he was close enough to touch. She could smell the wine on his breath, the sweat on his skin, the faint medicinal odor of the valerian root he took for his seizures. "I am afraid," she said. It was the most honest thing she had said all day. "So am I," he said. And then he sat down on the bed beside her, and he took her hand, the hand with the heavy gold ring, and he held it between his own trembling palms. "We will be gentle with each other," he said. "We will do what must be done, and then we will lie in the dark and pretend that we are somewhere else. You will think of your dusty anteroom. I will think of the cathedral in Passau, where I used to sit in the choir stalls and listen to the boys sing. And we will survive. That is what Habsburgs do. We survive." He leaned over and blew out the candle. The room went dark, lit only by the dying fire, and in the darkness, Maria Antonia felt his hands on her shoulders, pushing her back onto the pillows. She felt the weight of his body on hers, the heat of his skin through the linen of her nightgown. She felt his breath on her neck, quick and shallow, and she heard him murmur something, a prayer perhaps, or a curse. She did not cry, she did not scream. She lay still, as Doña Inés had told her, and she let him do what he needed to do. She closed her eyes and thought of the sparrow, the children, the dogs barking at cats. She thought of the dust. When it was over, he rolled off her and lay on his back, breathing heavily. She got up, went to the table, and washed herself with the vinegar and water. The liquid was cold, almost freezing, and it stung where his body had bruised hers. She returned to the bed and lay down on the far edge, as far from him as she could get without falling off. He was already asleep, his mouth open, his breath rattling in his chest. Maria Antonia stared at the ceiling and waited for morning,